Okay. We should be live. Let me double check this stream real quick. We'll kick this bad boy up. Up. Kick this up. Kick this off. Okay. We should be live. Let me double check this stream real quick. Okay, cool. Yes, we are live. Welcome back, party people, for another DAOhaus Haus Party live. We're back. Thanks for joining us. And thank you to our guest, Ramsay Brown, for jumping in this week. We'll jump into that stuff in a minute. But first off, we got house updates. What's up, Mage Smiths? You guys are traditionally first.
Yeah, we are deep in code. Pretty much rewriting the entire thing. It seems like at this point. So, but yeah, we're past design stage, and we're deep in code on a full refactor of the full interface. Yeah, we're just in heads down code mode pretty much this month.
I'm typing as we speak, so.
Same, yeah.
I can hear it. Mute yourself if you're not talking. I was just thinking, who's typing? Sweet. Yeah, I mean, on that front, not too much to say. You can check the recordings of old episodes if you want to see some of the teases of what we're building there. But at this point, just like you said, knee deep in code, making the thing click. Anything cool on alchemists and tokenomics? Same deal. Just kind of cruising on what is house and what it looks like to get out there, right?
Yeah, we're still kind of working on kind of this idea of Uber house, how DAOs can really work together, and we can kind of further this kind of way for DAOs to kind of be exchanging value with each other so that it becomes its own kind of world, and how to reward people who do that, and how to get governance between DAOs, get people working together through ambassadors and delegates, and adding all this kind of boring governance stuff, but trying to make it fun too. So,
for sure,
it's coming along.
The alchemist conversations are a lot of fun because they're very much just, oh well, here's the potential. Like, there's a reason we end up talking about the Federalist Papers a bunch, because ultimately you have these token tools, but you're trying to apply them to human behavior. And so frequently we're just sitting there going, yeah, but factions. Yeah,
no, but, Adam, the reason you're talking about the Federalist Papers a lot is because you're here.
Yeah, that's fair. I see, Ramsay knows that I tend to do that all over the place.
It's awesome. It's why I keep showing up.
Awesome. Yeah, and then on the Rangers comms and community side, we got some cool stuff brewing to go with the launch when that comes up. We just don't know exactly what it is yet. For sure, it'll be a dope video. Working on the event side of stuff to see if there's something else cool we can kind of set up for the couple weeks after that. Hackathon, something like that. But ideation phase with that stuff. So if you want to play along, jump in the DAOhaus Discord. We be talking about it. Kick ass. Where's the clock? I can't find my clock because I just switched to Windows. There it is. Sweet. I feel like that's the fastest we've mowed through the House DAOhaus updates, which is awesome because
I didn't blab on for a long time like I usually do.
Which we're good. Ramsay and I can for sure kill dead air. So
we've been doing it for years.
So next up is, on to the fun part for me, at least, the guest stuff, because I'm in the DAOhaus. I know what y'all are up to all the time. Yeah, man, thanks for joining us for this thing. Ramsay is
Adam, thanks for having me.
One of my dearest friends from the LA community. He's LA sort of startup project doing stuff community. He's an advisor on Juris. You were co-author on the Juris white paper, so your crypto.
I was, if my dusty neurons recall properly, yeah.
You're so that crypto credentials run deep as well. But broadly, I'd say you're a philosopher, a scientist, starter of projects, doer of things. You're one of the first people I ran into who, once we were working hand in hand on the project, like the Juris white paper, would proactively ask me to tell you things I was grateful for in the morning. And I should say, when it comes to scientists, you're a behavioral scientist. And when at the time I said, hey, I really appreciate that, you were like, well, and then you started talking about behavioral science and the value of gratitude and like community cohesion and things like that. So
which good reminder to me that we did that. I need to get you back on that. I've been doing that every day with up to about 15 people for several years now.
Wow.
It's been a fantastic health exercise in being proactive about my mental health, as well as a way to shine a little bit of light out into the otherwise entropic cold cosmos. And yeah, for that brief background, it's been a pleasure getting to know Adam and work with Adam. If Adam is guilty of finding ways to wedge the Federalist Papers into conversation, I'm guilty of finding ways to take everything back to brain sciences. My professional background and training at USC was in computational neuroscience for PhD work. And I've since spent my time focusing mostly in startup context on this thing that lives at the intersection of human behavior, design, sustainable development, and artificial intelligence, which is what led Adam and I to get chatting about some of my recent work on corporate artificial intelligence responsibility as the next wave of corporate social responsibility moving forward. And then its relationship, of course, to DAOs, not because AI and DAOs immediately have direct interface, but I think when it comes to the responsibility pieces, they share a lot of similar constraints about some open-ended questions in the field about how we think about responsibility, which is a very, very traditional kind of subject to discuss in very non-traditional contexts.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's great that you're joining us today, because we've had maybe this is our fourth or fifth now, and it's mainly people that we either like are also DAO geeks or are people we know and are in the space. So it's cool to have another perspective, someone working in brain sciences and AI and other really cool fields, and to kind of get your take on these things.
Well, thanks. I appreciate that. And this is
And I like
admittedly...
your hat, too.
Thank you. Yeah. If anybody else has a hat that they'd like to put on right now, since we tend to all wear many hats, I've got
I'll join you.
a wall of them behind me in my
All I
home.
have is that horse hat.
But
I'll have to wear my headphones.
now actually your horse hat is what inspired me for this. Okay, that's a great hat. Thank you. My first mate just came and delivered this onto my head. So
that distracted me in the best possible way.
Great, yeah. Which is always the best ways to be responsible.
We originally met at an event where you gave a talk called "Ideas Are Dangerous," I think, or something. Like
No, a dangerous ideas. It's the 10 things that the education system is not really set up to teach you, and they're not they're not like stick a fork in a socket dangerous. They're Copernicus dangerous. This was ranging from control theory and negative feedback loops to emergence, the idea of the relationship between humans, capital, and technology, institutional inertia, the things that kind of explain why the world works the way it does, ranging from systems of neurons to atoms to peoples to economies to governance. Consider it like the systems thinking primer. But all of these ideas dangerous because they make being a cog in the machine an uncomfortable conclusion afterwards. So the post Viennese school of education isn't really set up to turn people into systems level Buckminster Fuller free thinkers, for obvious reasons. That it's really nice to have millions of interchangeable parts of the human capital intellectual economy, because it makes for the Taylorism of production much more effective.
Is this
but that was
more
really,
like at a early childhood like education level, or are you talking like through the whole thing?
like if you try to take a class on cybernetics in college, you can't. You learn a little bit about feedback loops in biology and a little bit about them in economics and a little bit about control theory and physics and engineering, but no one's going to sit down. You can't take a class or a seminar series that's going to express to you that some of the most interesting phenomenon you're ever going to experience in organizations that have more than two components is the principles of positive and negative feedback loops and error correction as a fundamental framework of the structure of reality. No one's going to teach you that. we don't really structure majors to teach the things that are interesting, dangerous ideas.
So
that was the where I met Adam.
I think those are all good points, and in community, those things are all really important too, right? Like how does, in your opinion, how does like a community, like we're talking about DAOs, so like a community of people that are have like a goal to do something, usually pretty flat. Like how do you like foster that that kind of thinking and those feedback loops? And
so the feedback loops was one of the 10 ideas that I shared. And when I think about the construction of community and flat organizations, I think that one of the things that I'm sure you have been exploring that rings most true to me is the imperative for each segment of the organization to have a clear ownership and purpose behind it. Because hierarchy works really well when you need highly interchangeable, skilled labor to get jobs done. But if you're looking to build something that has less hierarchy, you're relying on this dynamic for every member to switch between individual contributorship and leadership and ownership, being able to both simultaneously take orders and give orders and operate independently and as a unit. Culturally baking that in looks like, I think, helping people connect to the underlying why as to why they're here and why they're doing what they're doing as it scratches certain itches in their own life. It is because while there is good incentive structures in place, you can't leverage the same types of structures of control that you would in a hierarchical model, in that kind of flatter model. So you need everyone owning their own follow-ups, follow-throughs. And I think the way you get that at a cultural level is connecting with why. Why are people here? What does this matter to them? And how do you foster and be proactive about those conversations and then monitor that and check in with it consistently that their behavior is lining back up to why they're here and what matters to this for them.
yeah, I think that's a really good point. The why. One of the things we try to like think about up front when someone's starting a community is like, get that down, just get something down and let your community iterate on it together. It's like your manifesto, right? Something that becomes the cultural kind of driver for everyone that okay, you're not going to have a boss telling you what to do. We want you to be very like self-sovereign and a self-starter. If you have questions, fall back onto this one-page manifesto, and just let that be your boss.
And empower people to have, I don't want to use that reserved term here very seriously, so I'm going to use this as a casual term, but sub-manifestos by which people can author their own connection to the bigger purpose here that is written in the manifesto. I think it's that mapping of the big why to the small why that bridges that gap where when people are finding themselves up against all of the other challenges in their life, frictions, tensions, things that will drain them of their ability to productively participate in the community, that being able to scale between the big why and the small why. Why am I here though? I get why we're here, but why am I here? And why am I giving a shit about this thing that I have to do that, to be honest, right now is a little bit of like trench digging? That's really helpful. And I'm reminded of one of my business partners and actually another co-founder of ours or co-author of the Juris paper with Kerp, Dr. Combs, had a poster up in our first startup office that said, I'm going to butcher the quote a little bit, but something to the effect of, we who carve stones must always be dreaming of cathedrals. So I think it's the quarry miner's credo, is if you're spending time shoveling shit every day or digging stone from earth, you can't actually focus on digging stone from earth. You must be thinking of Notre Dame that's going to be built with that stone. You must be connecting back that like, look, I did nothing today but like move Jira tickets or slog against this contract or get this white paper written. But here's why I'm doing that. And bridging those small whys to big whys is critical. And it's going to be different for every person.
I love that. We had so one of our kind of memes in the space is Moloch, and so I don't know if you've read any about that. And So Moloch is like the god of coordination failure, and so we're trying to slay Moloch every chance we get, right? And it's like, but this came up in a last meeting I was in, that I like that small y to the big Y, because these huge cathedrals and these monuments, these wonders of the world, are kind of the things that are monuments to slaying Moloch, right? It's way people were able to come together, coordinate to build something, shovel the shit for as long as they had to build this huge, amazing like hanging gardens or something.
Mm-hmm. My co-founder is actually in the party with us right now. He is one of the Brady Bunch squares here, and he will attest to, as a public benefit corporation, we tend to think a lot about our charter of using emerging technology to support global quality of life. And that's a really good big why. And we've got some good manifestos on the books. But admittedly, what that translates to is a lot of shit shoveling constantly. And that translates to doing a ton of research. And we have been in this recent sprint heads down on kind of really nebulous, open-ended research questions. And that is the process where you actually do get the work done when you are in the work stream and you are working in the business. Connecting that back to the raison d'etre, the sensation of why we're here and what we're supposed to be doing with ourselves, is so critical, because it is you can lose yourself so easily in that trench.
Yeah, you need something that gives you some fulfillment and purpose, right? That and so having that further goal out there, knowing that you're doing something for something bigger is.
So if you asked Dr. David Seligman, who's one of the great contemporary philosophers on positive psychology, 10 years ago, to figure out what makes people flourish, he would have said positive emotions, engagement, relationships, and meaning. The PERM, the PERM model. Now, it was after one of his students came back and said, actually, I think you're missing something, that he updated it to the PERMA model, stuck the A on the end, because accomplishment, the joy and the satisfaction we get from small wins consistently, is a big part of what makes us flourish. And what we can do, and I'll flip this back to Kerp then, as something that I think DAOhaus is getting right, is anything we can do to chunk our work into recognizable accomplishments, and even putting the candy wrapper of gamification and the hand-me-downs mimetically of Gary Gygax and this wrapper of Dungeons and Dragons that is perfused this culturally complicated small corner of the net. That's fine and good, because it ties accomplishment to culture, and it matters. And it matters that we get those small wins, because it is not enough that you be thinking of the cathedrals. It's good to have meaning. That certainly is the meaning piece of flourishing, but you need the small accomplishments to feel like you're actually having a worthwhile time here.
At your last company, as I made a note to bring this up, and it feels like the right space. You once called me and said, at Dopamine, we have a variable reinforcement fund. This month, we've used it to purchase tickets to this concert. Would you like to join us? I was like, fuck yeah.
Oh yeah, didn't we all go to the LCD sound system?
Yeah. And then we had to sneak you in the back because your ticket turned out to be counterfeit.
Yep, I remember that. And because that's it. And this is one of the things that was a core finding that led us to build my first company, Dopamine Labs. If Adam's going to be reminded of this, because he's a new parent and his life's about to encounter all new parent pieces. But it turns out that dangling really large incentives in front of people doesn't really change daily behavior, but the unexpected reinforcement of small accomplishments does. This crashes out a part of the wiring in the brain responsible for behavior change and addictions and habits. Dopamine and the name Dopamine Labs and all of the press you hear around its relationship to social media and your smartphone is all very real, but it's all emergent from this very conserved wiring in your brainstem that evolved to help your brain do a really complicated task around the trade-off between exploring your environment and exploiting your environment. So do I keep eating at this bush, or do I go keep looking for other bushes? Am I safe here, or do I keep moving? Animals need really good switching systems for that. And part of the switching system involves if a new stimuli is better than you expected, it's going to be extremely pleasurable. And even as you continue to eat at that very delicious bush, because your expectations start matching reality, or rather reality catches up to your expectations, it stops being very reinforcing. It stops being very joyous. This is one of the fundamental samsara level sufferings of the human and animal condition. But it's also a really important thing to then remember when working with trying to do change management, especially with people. If we want to maintain a team and a community that feels like everyone's constantly in this and engaged and accomplishing things, we don't want to dangle giant rewards in front of them, because their expectation gap is going to be virtually nothing. They know exactly how good the reward is going to be when they get it, but rather reinforcing them as they go with small amounts of positivity, joy, and connection for small wins when they're not seeing it coming is what is going to disproportionately affect how engaged they are, how well they feel like they own their outcomes, how well they perform. And that concert series that Adam describes was part of that. We'd had a good month. Everyone had worked really hard, and no one really saw it coming until the day or two before, where we told everybody to clear out their calendars and grab an extra ticket for Kerp.
Yeah, that was fun. So there's another dopamine story that comes up frequently that I think it'd be fun to hit the genesis on. I ran into you guys at a career fair at some point.
No.
And honestly, this is how it went down for me. I noticed that people were carrying cans of Bud Light around the event, and I was like, what is happening here? And so I followed the Bud Light cans back, and it was like, oh, holy shit, it's you guys. Okay.
Yep.
And in order to submit for the positions that you guys had open, people had to
we had a few positions ready to hire.
Yeah. And in order to submit a resume, you had to fold it into the shape of a paper airplane and throw it at a target. And one of the targets, small in the upper corner, was you also get a Bud Light. You also get a beer or beverage. I think you had a bunch of options, right? Something like that.
We had a really big loop for you get a call back. We had a small loop for you get free beer, and then we had a loop about the size of a your pinky that was you just got the job on the spot. Mostly we thought that'd be cheeky, because a big part of it is we kind of thought that the tech scene was taking itself a little too seriously. So and everyone who's at a job fair is taking themselves way too seriously. So we got some Mylar balloons that spelled out our name, and we got a baseball bat so they could do a dizzy bat where you put on your head and have to spin around a whole bunch, and then you disorientedly throw your thing through a paper airplane resume, or your crumpled up resume. So at the end of the day, we had a box full of half destroyed resumes of really bright people. It was a really great cultural filter at the beginning, because anyone who took themselves or their resume too seriously to crumple it up, do a dizzy bat, and maybe win a beer, we probably didn't want to work with. In that same way that I've talked with Kerp about, what are the constraints that resting on the mythology, ethos, imagery, characterization of something like Dungeons and Dragons does for DAOhaus. The answer was, if anyone doesn't think that's at least funny or passable, it's kind of a first pass filter at culture.
Yeah, I think we deal with that a lot in the crypto space, because just to get, besides our memes, just to get into the space takes a lot of work, and a lot of you really have to want to figure out how to use this dApp on some page and go install MetaMask or whatever you're using and find some way to get crypto. And so once you've done all those things,
ton of barriers.
we filtered out all the people that we don't want anyways. And so you're either a sociopath or someone good.
Yeah. So what's the ratio so far?
I think it's probably we're at 95% good people.
It solves really effectively
besides the DeFi chads, but we can talk about that.
Yeah, I'd say 95% good in the DAO space.
DAO space, right?
Chads. Yeah.
Probably flipped in the DeFi space.
Well, and the reason the story comes up for me really frequently, like my experience of that was standing there because I was doing other business there, trying to talk to some startups about the project I was working on. So I hung out there for an hour, and I was surprised at the number of people that came up, had the rules explained to them, and then just kind of went, "I'm good," like, and moved on. And one or two of them, you were just like, "Yeah, fuck that guy." Like, but it also made your office a really cool place to hang out. And having been to your office, like every single one of those people, it was a great filter. You had to do zero work, and every single person that filter dismissed, it was like, nope, they would not have thrived in the space that I have tried to work in amidst you on a few occasions.
Yeah, and we think that there's really important conversations about monoculture, and there's really important conversations about, is this by default exclusionary because it's the kind of fun that only makes sense to one group of people, predominantly white, college educated, liberal leaning, coastal elite dudes with a tech background who had a lifelong narrative of, but I'm kind of a nerd inside. Yeah, admittedly, those pieces of that are very real. It's a very real problem that every company has to contend with. How you then bridge that between being exclusionary to the extent that you're not taking seriously the importance of the different backgrounds that people legitimately come from and the different ways people think, and then begging of people to suspend disbelief for just a moment and have fun with you in harmless ways is a fun challenge to get to thread. And we think that day we did a pretty fun experiment in that, because it was really harmless fun. Please make a paper airplane with your resume, spin the dizzy bat, and at worst, if you lose, we're still going to give you a small plastic dinosaur as a consolation prize. And we have your resume on file.
Yeah. Did you end up hiring anyone?
We did.
My recollection is that you did. Yeah.
Yeah, it was pretty cool. Yeah.
So now you've moved to focusing on AI, and we had a great conversation the other day about sort of AI and DAOs, because I think there's an interesting place where, like, everything we've talked about so far is like, mushy human emotion systems. And the place where they collide with software is always not as rigid as the programmers want it to be. And then the programs are always a little more rigid than the lawyers want it to be, like, or whatever. Or then the lawyers, like, I guess lawyers usually want more rigidity.
Just what
That's
the normal
a bad
people.
analogy, but either way, right? I mean, so you end up with this thing of, okay, I would characterize what you're working on now as like, it's important to have the uncomfortable conversation about what it means for that subset of people who are the ones wielding the technology to be making the AI algorithms, right?
Yeah. So to give people a little bit of background of what we're focusing on now. So I run an organization called Quol. You can find some information at us at Quol, Quol.ai. And our large focus right now is responding to the acceleration of AI adoption, because the second half of the conversation about accelerating AI adoption is that of accelerating AI risk. And as the State of AI annual report just came out a few days ago, it's been noted that in 2020, AI governance has seen almost no progress get made on it, largely because the incentive is not yet strongly felt. And our hypothesis is that that's about to change dramatically. AI, while it can be an exceptionally profitable technology for both small organizations and organizations at scale to adopt in terms of improving both their operating costs and their ability to capture new revenue in the market, it comes with risks ranging from its observability of states to bias it may induce inside your organization, brittleness it might have in terms of de-skilling of people and processes, as well as an oversized and under-discussed ecological footprint that finds itself at odds with most companies' stated corporate social responsibility objectives. But we don't really talk about a company's responsibility to use AI responsibly, because it's not part of the CSR dialogue yet, and it's not part of the AI dialogue yet. So what Qual is seeking to do is build a software as a service layer that can help every team, regardless of size or industry, navigate how to discuss, discover, document, and then mitigate the risk that different AI systems can pose in their value chain. Help them get a handle on this before we're looking at this as a put the toothpaste back inside the tube problem. When we had this conversation with Adam about what he's been working on with DAOhaus, a lot of the problems that are inside AI responsibility and AI governance deal with this problem of throats to choke. If you have a intelligent system that is making decisions autonomously, often with hidden states and components of its decision-making process that are trapped in hidden layers of networks, and it can't explain to you, nor is anyone equipped, not due to lack of technical know-how, but because of the structure of learning systems, no one's equipped to observe and investigate why the machine really did what it did and decided what it decided. Things like accountability for its decisions and its outcomes become really nebulous. And those are no longer just interesting philosophical or legal conversations. Those are going to, in the next 5 years, become increasingly important corporate risk conversations. Because as the satellite of stakeholders around a firm, ranging from regulators and tax collectors to investors, boards, trade unions, communities, and NGO groups, begin to more closely observe how firms are using automation and AI, this is going to become a place where understanding how that risk presents itself and how we need to talk about who's responsible for that risk becomes a concern that I think is going to have something that is going to be mirrored in the DAO community.
And I feel so the thing this made me think of sort of on our side is the what do you guys call it in the Moloch? There's a gas guzzlers metrics page.
Yeah.
That's
is that it? Yeah, the carbon footprint,
which is sort of an articulation of carbon footprint of your, like, that's what has paid for computational resources out of your use of the Ethereum network. Is that an accurate way to say what that is? Sort of a
yeah. Basically, we're like
leaderboard
tracking how much gas any one person has used. So to like run through one of these, the smart contracts are like, we can only do this in this after this condition, and then we can do this. But someone actually has to like tell it to go run and use the gas that it takes to run an Ethereum. So Ethereum is like a computer, but very, very expensive because every single computation takes a little bit of money. And so someone has to run those. And the interesting thing was there's a lot of the same people that are like run these functions through and pay for them. The highest one is actually bots, though. There's a few there's a few of the functions that actually return a reward when you do it. So you'll have to pay the gas, but then it kind of pays back your gas plus a little bit, because we really want someone to do these functions.
Yeah, no, I get that.
Now what happens are people have bots that start competing against each other and front running each other to try to run that first. And it's really a race to the bottom, to the point of like where someone is like, okay, well, it's not worth me running this anymore for 1 penny, but for 10 cents, maybe it is worth it. And there's no real cost to running a bot. So when the two bots are battling, they're just like paying more and more gas until it evens out. It's pretty funny.
And I think where this then overlaps is if you're an organization that is setting up those bots and part of your charter or understanding of your strategic operating risk involves a commitment to ecology, how does that organization think about the incentive it's under? Now, this organization here, the DAO, how does this DAO think about the incentive it's under to both perform in the community, but then have a responsibility for the bigger context in which it's operating and the role it plays in that?
Yeah, It's interesting, and there's a lot of like optimizations and stuff that can happen on a code level to make things cost less. But basically, like to run this big decentralized network, it costs a lot of money, and it costs a lot of power, basically. So ecologically, I mean, that may not be the best, but is it solving enough problems where it's actually better in the long run, right?
Right, and like
So
could you set
it
up
becomes like a complicated question, basically.
yeah, and that's where I think I'd love to hear from Adam how you think about this. It's clear it can be clear, I suppose, in communities like these that have a little more of a human face to each member who operates as both an owner and a contributor. It's clear who shareholders are, and kind of a transmorgification of that word from traditional capital structures to distributed capital structures. It's clear who shareholders are, but how do DAOs think about who their stakeholders are then? Like who are they responsible to beyond each other and the line of capital?
There are for sure people here who can speak better to the extent to which it shows up in like DAO code sort of structures and stuff, like share structures that we literally use within our DAO.
Well, I guess there's the group, there's the community's reputation itself that everyone's kind of accountable for.
Okay, so talk to
I
me about
suppose.
that.
So like like Metacartel, for example, is a DAO of grant that's giving grants, to projects throughout the Ethereum ecosystem. So members are pretty much like responsible for upholding its reputation for distributing those funds well, not only to themselves but to the external community. I guess, is that kind of what you mean?
So that would be an example of it. I think that you're onto something there. When we think about in risk assessment, then for AI and how a firm's use of AI translates to what creates threats and vulnerabilities for them, we think about who beyond the firm would have a stake in this going in a particular direction. And that could be community organizers, that could be boards of directors, that could be trade unions, that could be regulatory bodies. In that sense, then there's up to about 28 different dimensions of stakeholder that could be interested in or have a say in or be able to exert reputational pressure against a firm to change its behavior. So in that sense, what you're describing of a DAO's reputation in the community is the ultimate leverage factor, certainly. Do you see that the greater Ethereum community appears interested in being a stakeholder in DAO's behaviors, so to speak? Do people feel like there is a more collective shit to be given here, so to speak, about how each group is behaving?
Well, I think there's kind of two angles on that. One is how DAOs interact with other DAOs, right? But fundamentally, I think what makes it all interesting is that we're working on open source projects, right? So they're protocol projects, which means they're like shared software projects where everyone else has to know all the code, or else the protocol doesn't work. And then what we're taking on with the platform we're building, I think, is the challenge of how do you go from the necessary sort of small meme-driven, community-driven thing it takes to build a compelling product and community, et cetera, and like get it going. And then how do you incrementally or sort of progressively diffuse ownership of the value created by that protocol to the users of the protocol? Because if you get that flywheel going, you can start to solve like public goods problems that are what I have banged my head on for the last 3 years in the legal space. Like, it's hard to get people to pay for solutions to legal problems for people because you either need tax money or enough money to pay lawyers. So a lot of things go unsolved because it's not a good place for a startup. I can't make a bunch of money, so I can't get VC money, and so ultimately ends up with a sustainability problem. That on some
I
level.
wonder how is something like that in AI handled? Because in communities where we still have kind of reputational, we still have the external things to think about as individuals, and we're making votes in our own, self-sovereign capacity. Like if AI is making the decision, how do you an AI accountable? I mean, is AI like the anonymous thing, or is the community that's using the AI responsible, or how is that? How does
Right.
that
So
work?
so I've got a caveat that my understanding of where we're going is that I can give you an answer that's going to last for maybe the next 10 years, and I'm going to give you an answer that's fuzzy beyond that. At least an answer that feels safe through 2031 is that I do not expect a lot of truly autonomous machine intelligence systems to be alive on the net in the next decade, simply because the resources they require to train are obstreperously high still, and we're going to have a large cost barrier that's coming down, but it's going to have to come down substantially to truly get something interesting on autonomous. The capacity and capabilities of artificial intelligence right now are still exceptionally domain specific, and that makes them specialized and rigid. There's a lot of interesting debate about whether we're ever actually going to get towards something like general artificial intelligence, which isn't exactly what you're describing per se. You could be describing a more bespoke, constrained Oracle system, but they're still very good at doing very small, narrow tasks just better and learning from their assumptions as they go. So to me, that says that those two factors combined, the cost and the specialization, says in the next 10 years, the artificial intelligence systems we do see interacting with humans are largely going to be owned by institutions, and they're predominantly going to be owned by corporations for the time being. We're seeing a mass exodus from academia of both skilled labor and professors, even getting drained out of academia into corporate R&D labs and product labs. So I don't expect academics to push this forward really far, other than basic research, but not in deployments. Deployments we're largely going to see corporate, because military and governance is still massively lagging behind on adoption, and everything they're going to do is going to be segmented and walled off anyway. So we're going to see corporate AI systems. So when we think about that, the questions of anonymity go away, but the questions of responsibility fall down to open-ended conversations that are still going on about, is it management's job to understand and continuously monitor the behavior and aberrance of behavior in intelligence systems? Is it down to engineers who did implementations? Is it down to data scientists who labeled the training data? Is it down to operations managers whose jobs it were to pull reports and understand how the system is behaving? We actually don't have great consensus about that right now. One of the interesting things we're focusing on is how to help teams build their own understandings of where liability lies and who is responsible for monitoring model performance and how that might change or degrade or be aberrant over time. But it looks like for the time being that method of taking it on kind of a team by team basis better aligns with how companies currently handle operational risk in other ways. So there is no one answer to risk analysis, but there are really common patterns that teams will use when developing risk assessment policies and risk response policies. That's the trend we see right now, and I think that's the way it's going to go for a while, as every firm is going to set their own policies for who becomes the throat to choke in a system that doesn't have a neck.
That's where I think, and that's where I think it hits DAOs, because and this was sort of the underlying conceit of the Juris white paper, which is just you can even look at it on a technical level. There are incomputable problems. And so if a smart contract ever has something in it that, like, it's possible to say, we think everything's perfect, and you've literally drummed up an you want to talk about incomputable problems a bit, and then I think that gets us to, like, DAOs as dump valves, right? Like, you need, and I want to read you this text that you sent the other day that is like a perfect description of the thing. I had a stupid typo in a text that I then tried to explain, and you said, brains don't always brain brainily, but luckily brains are really good at braining what other brains were trying to brain. I mean, it's a ridiculous sentence, but
everyone understood that.
Yeah, right, exactly. So
everyone understood it because brains are very good at braining.
Would AI understand that?
Right. So, like, fundamentally, there's just going to be problems where people aren't going to feel heard and, like, emotionally sound if you don't, if the answer to your dispute is that you, like, it's not that you're heard by another person. And DAOs is where software is eating the coordination of those people. I would say.
That's fascinating. Yeah. And I can't help but wonder how. And so that's by the way, that's the 10-year answers. In the next decade, it's going to be teams that have bespoke corporate AI responsibility policies that mesh with their intersection of operational risk and corporate social responsibility to set up on a case-by-case basis how to best respond to atypical events. Beyond that, and this is the I get to take off my captain's hat and put on my VR goggles and wax philosophical about Gibson-esque scenarios into the 2040s, is that, and this is one of the things that attracted me to DAOs originally, is this idea that you can have a codified system that makes decisions as it goes along, but given that the decisions were kind of already pre-encoded. What am I doing here? There we go. Into the structure of the contract. Now, if those become sophisticated enough and the price performance on learning systems is such that they actually become really cheap to execute, if not as they go into the testing phase, if not in the model training phase, this becomes the case that it's really cheap to deploy systems that are able to exhibit decision making and autonomous learning, and they can be written as participants in or the mechanism of distributed autonomous organizations. We're in a really interesting scenario there in which I don't think we have adequate understandings yet outside of the Gibson-esque Turing police of how to think about truly autonomous systems that are, at a cybernetics level, functionally alive on the net, in that they consume resources, require input from the environment, behave autonomously in a goal-directed fashion, and produce output into their environment that they can take back in as a secondary input stream to better correct their behavior. These living things we're going to need ways of understanding then who's responsible for them, or what the ethics of their containment or destruction are if they begin behaving in ways that we find running afoul of ethical, moral, or legal constraints. That to me is where the most interesting conversation that we're probably going to have in the past 300 years gets to take place. And I'm betting we're not going to be pretty old men by the time it happens, because it's going to be something dumb and small in the way that, like, the history of Ethereum over the past and the crypto community over the past 5 or 6 years has had a few outstanding dumb small mistakes or dumb small incidents that have caused it to wildly have to adapt really quickly. It's going to be something dumb and small like that this thing was alive and then we had to kill it because we couldn't figure out who to hold responsible for its behavior. And it was learning as it went that things become really fascinating, I think.
How do we elect a new AI president?
Right.
I mean, it's funny you mentioned that. It's funny you mentioned that. So there was a prefecture in Tokyo about 3-4 years ago that said, look, at the local governance level, we're pretty good at collecting data about our neighborhood, and we understand our resources and how information, matter, energy, capital, and people flow through it. And a few people got together with the backing of, I think, like Mitsubishi and SoftBank, and made a thing that was like a very complicated Excel spreadsheet, basically, that had enough of the ability to make meaningful decisions based on inputs. And then they got a 3D artist to make a graphic for this sexy robot candidate who was now going to legitimately be on the ballot. And the governor of Tokyo looked at this and said, okay, fine, sure. If, all what you've basically said is you're going to forego a human in the loop and just have extra laws. The laws are just now baked into Microsoft Excel. And they put that on the ballot. So we're getting there.
Yeah.
And I would say, like everything else futuristic, look to Japan and South Korea
Fabricated pop stars and stuff.
Yeah, for its adoption in terms of trying to push the envelope and where rubber really hits the road with emerging technologies. And that's one of them is what if we just foregone trust in humans and just did rules? And that's really, that was a predecessor to what we're doing here.
So I think I have from there a good segue into the usual. We're coming up on an hour. So at this point, we kind of run into overtime if people are good to hang out. But otherwise,
I've got about 10 more minutes.
Cool. Well, yeah, thank you for joining us before we hit those 10 minutes. In the remaining 10, we usually do a section called Boost Bash. So within DAOhaus, we have boosts available for your DAO that let you do, X, Y, and Z community things. At least that's the construct we're building on inside of the system. So we like to look at like what, in the context of what you just talked about, like we're already sort of working on that thing of like, hey, let's make it a fun interface. Let's tread on the space that gamers are used to in terms of how we think about how your community, functions. Mm-hmm. Like, what's a cool, put your product hat on, which I feel like you're already wearing.
I'm already wearing my product hat.
Like, what's a cool boost on top of a DAO that does kind of what you were just talking about in all the contexts, right? Like in a world where, like, I don't know, we can have arbitrary points systems, like we can play real life like Mario now. What are you trying to do, Joe? Just trying to get a high score.
I really like the idea.
Help me better.
Oh, sorry.
Help me better understand the question first. I think I need like.
Yeah. So there's one piece I think missing from
that
I might need to help you with, which is essentially like, I think the core power that a DAO has functionally is the allocation of funds. And then it allows the community to effectively sort of democratically make decisions about how those funds are allocated.
Money and power.
Say what? Yeah, money is power. And so, community, like how the community evolves is influenced by the ability to roll out reward badges or membership tokens that you get to, carry around with you or whatever. And those are all kind of like added layers. So within the system, you can, put a plugin in that gives your community X.
So I would be fascinated to see this. The greater DAO community is made of, this is a first order approximation, and I apologize in advance. The greater DAO community has a similar cultural makeup to a lot of other tech early adoption. And it's a bunch of people that more or less look like, think like, are shaped like you and I, Adam, sitting around working on these projects. And we can talk a lot about why that is the case. And I'm not here to give that drum to beat, but I can't help but wonder how, as DAOs go from being emergent and bleeding edge to early adopter to mainstream adopter, these things that are becoming more normal and start interfacing with more people that don't look or think or pray or do like we do. How might organizations step out in front of that or be rewarded for beginning to blaze the trail on open protocols about things like sustainability and responsibility and understanding how, in order to be taken seriously on a larger scale by a combination of economics and inevitability, these things that might have seemed like we don't need to worry about that, we're just playing on the bleeding edge, are going to begin to matter more and more and more about how how DAOs at their core at a strategic level can incorporate the imperative to, like every other major type of organization on Earth, that it wants to be taken very seriously, take things like the Sustainable Development Goals as part of a strategic operating plan, as opposed to since we live on the net and the net's made of MacBooks and MacBooks are made of power and power is available from the wall, therefore it doesn't matter what our ecological footprint is. Like, how do they begin acting like every other adult in the room at a policy level? And because, as you said, it's open source, at a protocol level, how can boosts and rewards be given to organizations that start blazing the trail there?
I mean, I think Gas Guzzler, as like the Gas Guzzler leaderboard, is, you know, kind of like a beginning experiment in this space, which is like, to what extent, you know, is a DAO also an effective way to codify and or quantify like your impact in any given realm? You know, I mean, ideally we pick the 5 that are the most important, you know, climate change, whatever, you know, carbon, I guess would be the carbon offset.
Go down the UN 17 Sustainable Development Goals, and it would be interesting then to ideate how DAOs can make an impact on each of these things, ranging from increasing how we sustainably produce and consume to health worldwide, the elimination of poverty and hunger, the sustainable securing of drinkable water supplies. Each of these that are the remaining big pictures. Because if you go to like an energy company, every energy company on Earth that's large enough to try to compete has a policy in place for how it thinks about fresh water on Earth. You think, what the fuck does an energy company have to do caring about fresh water? It's not like that they're not just that their operations impact water tables, but that the halo of stakeholders around them has demanded that because they have so much capital at play and at their disposal, they can make a real difference. So like Coca-Cola got targeted a few years back for why they don't do more to help out with AIDS, even though they don't have anything to do with the AIDS crisis. But some people identified that because they just have a large enough institutional inertia, they could make a dent on this. And then they began giving free testing and treatment to anyone in sub-Saharan Africa who was part of the greater Coca-Cola franchise team who was suffering from or close to the AIDS epidemic. Everyone has to start taking these things seriously when they get big enough or large enough, starting from the get-go and incorporating that way of thinking into how the organizations think about their place in the world is only going to set themselves up, and then the big collective distributed us up for success better later on.
So UN sustainability goal badges. That's your boost.
I think so. I think that'd be kind of cool.
Yeah,
I think that'd be really cool. Like, look, every org has to give something to give a shit about beyond just giving a shit about developing the protocols. Like, there has to be the so what that ties back to our common humanity and the deep ethical imperative to start doing shit now.
Right.
We can't like die in a ball of fire, but say, wasn't that at least fun to tinker for 20 years?
Yeah. I don't know, man. I feel like that's a good place to wrap it up. That's a pretty solid boost.
I think so.
like it. Thanks for coming out. Thanks for hanging out, everyone.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks, Rams.
I really appreciate it. Everybody, thank you so much.
If you're on YouTube, like and subscribe. And otherwise, catch us on Discord. There'll be links in descriptions in the doobly-doo, as some would say.